Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Monday, May 25th, 2020, and today we're going to be taking a little bit backtrack in time and take a look at the approval rating of President Trump in February of 2020. The reason why I'm doing this is because this is the last time the Morning Consult did an approval rating poll in each individual state before the COVID-19 pandemic. Considering that this started around mid-March, that definitely would have taken a direct impact on the way that Americans viewed him, so I wouldn't necessarily trust the March polling too well, but April and May, I'm excited to see if they do release it sometime soon. It seems like they put pretty much a halt on it, considering the fact that they've done it for every single month since his presidency, and it seems they've taken a stop just because of more than likely the COVID-19 pandemic. Once they do release results for the upcoming months or the previous months, I really want to compare that to this video. So I want to go ahead and take a look at it because the last time I looked at his approval rating, I showed you guys this map in February, but things do change, obviously, now, and I want to talk about how he already was at a bad point statewide for almost every single state that is a swing state, and talk about why that's going to be even worse in the future. Again, we're talking about President Trump, who never really peaked further than 46% in terms of an overall approval. He has never been in the positive except for the first week after he was inaugurated as president. That was the only time he's ever been in the positive nationwide. I don't think there's really that many presidents in recent American history that have that bad in terms of a track record. But then again, he is a whole nother type of president that we've never seen before. So just because he's negatively approved of in some of these states does not mean that Democrats should underestimate the power of his voting turnout and his base support. So let's take a look further. So February 2020. Again, I chose this one because it was right before coronavirus, and we can compare it directly to the after or during coronavirus pandemic polling data. And when you look, there's a whole lot of red and there's a whole lot of green. The green means positive, the red means negative. That's just how the colors work. And if you see, there isn't a lot of dark green. There's a lot more dark red than there is dark green, which means no states are 100% or at least very solid in terms of approving of him, except for a couple. Those are the states of Wyoming, where he has a positive 27 net approval, in Alabama, which is, I believe, is highest because West Virginia used to be 28 for Alabama and 24 for West Virginia. So when you look at this, doesn't look too good for the president. Now, we're going to actually compare it to right at the midterm elections in 2018 because that was when the Democratic wave hit for the election, I guess, for the Democrats in 2018. So we can look at that right after we discuss all of these swing states. But obviously, on the West Coast, it's going to be a negative approval rating. What's interesting, though, is the fact that President Trump is narrowly approved of in some solid Republican states. This does not mean that these states are going to be close, but it is just very interesting that the president fails to capture an approval amongst voters that gave him a win in 2016 by 30% of the vote, 25% of the vote. For example, a state like Montana, Donald Trump has a positive 6 net approval, or in North Dakota, positive 9. South Dakota's 10, Nebraska's 6. Sure, there could be some discrepancies in the polling data, but when you look at the, history in those states, at a point in time, he was at a net negative in Nebraska. So when you're looking at it, and some of these states used to be very solid. President Trump had a very positive approval rating right after he was inaugurated, and then it started going downhill from there. But if you look, they're generally polling the same people, and he had a very positive approval rating in almost every single state. Actually, there are only a few states that disapproved of him at this point. But if you look, these were roughly the same numbers that he won the election by, but now it looks like he was at a worse point. Oh my gosh, why can't I click it? He was definitely at a point where I can't do anything on this website, where it was not as good for him in terms of the overall approval rating, and that was just during whatever time period. It really all depends, but it's just the fact that it is closer in some of these states. Some of these people may not approve of him because they think he's not doing as much as they thought he would in office, which doesn't mean they're not voting for him again. It's just that they may want him to focus on more issues, or they may be unhappy with the way that he was what he's doing after being put in office by those same voters. So that's why we're taking a look at these swing states. So I really don't want to discuss too much time. Kansas is actually the closest in terms of the Sun Belt, including the state of Texas. Not Sun Belt, red wall here. Kansas is at a positive 4. Not super important to the overall electorate. We don't really need to focus on the approval ratings and the solid Democratic or Republican states, but it is just interesting to look at. So Nevada is the first swing state in terms of its overall net approval of -10, with -13 in Colorado, -11 in New Mexico. This looks pretty solid for the Democratic Party. They will carry these states of Colorado, New Mexico, and Nevada based off this approval rating map, too. I might actually make a video about that, taking the approval rating once they release maybe a March, April, or May numbers. I'll apply that to an electoral map so you can see how bad it's actually gotten for President Trump. His overall net approval rating of the coronavirus pandemic has dipped nationwide. So, again, he's probably at one of his lower points in terms of his presidential rule right now. But if you look at these states, the election history, the approval rating of the president, the 2016 presidential election results, President Trump has absolutely no reason to actually win in any of these states. There is nothing that says the Republican Party will be even competitive in some of these states as well. Yes, it will be a narrow margin for Biden, not narrow, a mildly okay margin, so somewhere around 6 to 10%, but Trump is not winning any three of these states. For Arizona, he has a +1 net approval, which I think is interesting, which questions whether or not Arizona is truly going to be a toss-up. So we're going to actually put that one in the toss-up column because we're going to come back and talk about it. Texas is +7. So honestly, based off these numbers in February, the president really didn't have much to worry about. If you go over to the state of Iowa, -5. So when we look at that one, that's pretty surprising considering that it voted for Trump. I say this in every video, but it is just something to point out. Iowa voted more for President Trump than Texas in 2016. So it shows you how much he swung that state and how much Texas has regressed from being a solid Republican state. In terms of Minnesota, the same as Iowa. So, even though Hillary Clinton carried Minnesota, Trump carried Iowa by an even larger margin. For Wisconsin and Michigan, they both share a negative net 10 in those states. So that's actually pretty good news for the former vice president in both of those states, meaning they are 100% in play. Again, the Democrats only need to outperform the 2016 margins by 1%. If President Trump goes from being positively approved of in these states after his election to negative, well, that tells you a lot about what might happen in 2020. In terms of Ohio, it looks like it's a dead tie, even though he won the state by nearing 9%. In Pennsylvania, it's actually the one that approves of him the most out of all of these Rust Belt states. I find that to be very interesting, considering that we think Wisconsin is going to be the closest. Realistically, based off all of the data we have, Wisconsin will likely be the closest, but in terms of overall approval rating, it looks like Pennsylvania might be the closest purely based off that number. But then again, you do have to take a look at the demographics, and you have to take a look at the previous elections, and you have to take a look at a number of other factors that don't necessarily point Pennsylvania as being the closest Rust Belt state, more so Wisconsin, but it is just always interesting to see that Pennsylvania approves of him by the largest margin. For Virginia, they don't disapprove of the president as much as Michigan and Wisconsin, which I find to be somewhat baffling. I do see why he's negatively approved of in these states. They didn't vote for him, but Virginia I thought would be way more firm in their opposition to President Trump. +4 in North Carolina, +2 in Georgia, and +3 in Florida. So those states might actually retain in the Republican column. No real worries for those states. To be completely honest, we know those states probably aren't going to Vice President Biden, but New Hampshire is -18. New Hampshire, I used to classify as a likely Democratic state. I still do, because he has said a number of things about New Hampshire that are just going to be played on loop in terms of ad references. And also, New Hampshire didn't vote for him in 2016. And they also look like they're going to be shifting more to the left in 2020. New Hampshire, Hillary Clinton lost the Democratic primary in New Hampshire to Bernie Sanders by a very, very large margin. Though Joe Biden did get 5th place in that event, I honestly think that he's going to perform better. He does perform better amongst white voters nationwide than Hillary Clinton did in 2016. So I would say that Joe Biden has a better chance in New Hampshire. And also, looking at this approval rating, it's one of the many factors that point to a loss for Donald Trump in the state of New Hampshire. So for Maine, -6. That one's probably going to still go to the Democratic Party. So let's go ahead and compare. Let's go back to November 2018 and see if we're working with the same type of angry electorate. So November 2018, this was the midterm wave in which the Democratic Party won back the House of Representatives, and though losing seats in the United States Senate, picked up seats in the states of Arizona, and I believe there was one other state, or they might have just retained some of their states. But looking at the overall map, again, not too much is different. We have the same 3 states popping out as approving of President Trump by the largest margin. Wyoming was the largest at this point. Same terms of approval rating in these states, but Nevada has actually increased in terms of its disapproval rating of the president. Looking over in Colorado, it's roughly the same. but even worse for President Trump. Now in New Mexico, it's actually a little bit better, but New Mexico is realistically not going to be competitive. Arizona used to disapprove of the president by -2, now approving of him in February, but it looks like it's way more winnable for the Democratic Party. Back in February, Joe Biden wasn't even the front runner in the Democratic primary anymore. So again, we're working with different candidates and a different America after this. For Texas, it's the same exact thing. Again, Kansas is still around the same. North Dakota and Kansas shared an overall approval rating. Again, safe states really don't matter. Florida, +2. Georgia, +3. North Carolina, +2. The Republicans won their statewide races in Florida and Georgia in terms of the governor's race, in terms of the Senate race in Florida. And, there are a number of things that happened, but they still ended up winning for the Rust Belt. -9 in Michigan, -10 in Wisconsin, -5 in Pennsylvania, -7 in Iowa, -10 in Minnesota. So while Trump may have increased in some of the Rust Belt states, he's roughly remained around the same amongst two major states, Wisconsin, Michigan, and actually probably Pennsylvania. Though it's a little bit better for him, again, he's still negatively approved of in those states. And, again, the Biden campaign really only needs to win some of those states in order to win the election. So that's just another thing. Looking at the Northeast, -12 in New Hampshire, so it's gotten worse. A little bit improved in Maine, but still probably going to end up going for the Democrats. And Ohio is still the same. So we are generally working with the same type of electorate from 2018, the same one that won the Democrats the House of Representatives, that won them the national popular vote, that did very well for them in the governor's election. So when we're looking at the comparison in terms of approval rating of President Trump, even before the COVID-19 pandemic, he was at a very bad point entering into the 2020 election. Americans were not necessarily happy with the way that he's been handling our country. But especially after the COVID-19 pandemic, and as this continues into being way worse than most people thought, President Trump is only going to continue to take a hit. And once they release the numbers here, I'm more than confident that Donald Trump will be at a more negative position than he is right now. Even though COVID-19 is becoming increasingly polarized, it's very important to note that President Trump is dipping in terms of his nationwide approval rating. And if the election was held today, it would be very bad news for the president. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you all later today.